Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our viewers and listeners all around the world, and welcome to the first CharIN Tuesday Europe of 2024. It has been a while since we had our Europe tours, but as you will see at the end of today's session, we have quite a few CharIN Tuesdays in the pipeline for this year. But today's CharIN Tuesday is titled Sustainable Payment Services for EV Drivers. As we can all agree, consumer-centric approaches to the integration of payment systems into the charging infrastructure are key. So does industry and government feel they are fulfilling or will fulfill this approach? With the recent taking effects of the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation and ongoing reviews of payment services legislations such as the PSD2 and PSR, our event will delve deeper into consumer-centric approaches to integrating payment systems into charging infrastructure. So today we will discover what payment services are permitted by EU law, see what challenges exist in the world of e-invoicing, and explore cutting-edge technologies and future trends. As usual, I will introduce each speaker with a question. But before I start, and as I'm a big believer of safety, please make sure you have located the emergency exit closest to you. Also, please make sure that you have identified the location where you can re-log into the event as quickly as possible, as there is nothing to be missed today, and you should leave your stuff behind in case of an emergency anyway. So if this is not possible, then don't worry, a recording will be made available afterwards. One more point then. Please note that you can submit questions via the chat box. I will try to take them into account as much as possible. So, Kai, let me start with you. Kai Tullius, your policy officer, DG Move of the European Commission, and one of the masterminds behind AFIR. First of all, congratulations. AFIR has taken effect about 10 days ago, and shortly before you published the AFIR Q&A for Article 5, which deals with the operation of recharging infrastructure. For those of you who don't know, the Q&A follows requests from various stakeholders to receive clarifications on the provisions of the relevant article. So may I start with the question, Kai? What payment systems are permitted according to AFIR?
Well, the payment services that are actually mentioned in the regulation. I think there was a bit of difficulties around the question and answers with respect to Article 5. I mean, the process was basically we provided an initial assessment that was heavily criticized by the sector. So we looked into the complaints and we actually found them substantiated. So we actually softened our approach, I would say. And then we had actually very long discussions with our legal services on how to best formulate things, because our legal services were not entirely happy with the idea of publishing any sort of question and answers. And for a very valid legal reason, it's that only the Court of Justice can actually interpret EU law, and it is not up to us as the Commission services to interpret the law. So we actually ended up, I think, with a kind of a hybrid, which hopefully doesn't overstep our competences and still be of some help for you. But I think in a nutshell, what we believe the article says is that for recharging points above 50 kilowatt, either a payment terminal has to be there, or a NFC reader that reads payment cards. Payment cards here, it's important to note that it's not just physical payment cards, which we actually said at the very beginning, but that actually embedded payment cards in banking apps are also basically covered here as payment cards. So it's not just the physical payment card. For payment options for recharging points below 50 kilowatt, the co-legislator granted more flexibility to the operators here. And of course, when it comes to granting more flexibility, it also means, well, a little bit of less legal certainty to clearly determine a priori which sort of payment option is actually covered and which one is not. So here, I think it is important that basically electronic payments using a payment card must be possible. That can be through a normal web interface. It can be through a dynamically generated QR code that you scan with your mobile phone. But I think that the basic idea is any user who comes to a recharging point must, with the help of his mobile phone and his credit or debit card, be able to pay without actually entering into any contract with or any contract that goes beyond the recharging, the buying the recharging service, without entering into a contract that goes beyond this recharging service with the operator or any mobility service provider. I think that is the basic idea, and I hope that actually covers most of the user-friendly ad hoc payment systems that are out there in the market.
Okay, thank you, Kai. Moving on to you, Jan. This is also both your and Kai's not first rodeo in the CharIN Tuesday, so thank you very much for both of you for joining. You're a team leader Europe at NOW, and NOW oversees the implementation of climate neutral tech in an integrated energy system in Germany as an emanation of the state. And you're the main contact person for EU affairs. Do you see a difference in what is permitted to what Kai has mentioned, or do you think, and actually not or, do you think it corresponds to the German market?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. I would always trust the Commission. Especially if they put out a Q&A. So yeah, there's no divergence from my side on that point. Of course, what we had in Germany for quite a while differed. Or at least there was an expectation that the charging ordinance would, well, pave a different path towards payment and payment with cards. But I mean, it's a regulation, so it's legally binding and has to be applied directly. So luckily, there's not going to be much difference for the German market if it comes to payment, if you compare it to the rest of the single market.
Thanks, Jan. And now to you, Peter. You're amongst an impressive portfolio, head of regulatory affairs at Ampeco. Ampeco, a Bulgarian company, or headquarters in Bulgaria, but globally present, is an all-in-one EV charging management platform, white labeling being a very key element of it. Question to you, what technologies are currently determining payment system markets for charging?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Glenn, and thanks to the CharIN team for organizing this event. Well, over the last couple of years, we saw a lot of regulatory action in the space of payment options and payment services for EV charging, not only in Europe, by the way, also in the US, in the UK, and other markets. And I think the larger trend here is really that we see increased requirement, some from regulatory aspects, other from customer demand, to integrate payment terminals which in our case is the charge point management system. So this type of integrations have been really increasing in terms of demand. Our approach is hardware agnostic, and we've been working with several manufacturers to ensure those integrations. And we see also that it's a bit of a challenging topic, since most of the providers of payment terminals are relatively new to EV charging, and then there's the hardware aspect as well. So aligning the flows between all those different actors has been, I wouldn't say a challenge, but has been a task at hand for us. And we really see that opportunities coming from payment terminals can also bring a lot of value to the CPOs, but also to the drivers who can seamlessly charge.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, I got to come back to the original question. I got a question from the audience. Can a payment link also be sent by RFID to the phone? So no QR code example? Chris Heinemann. He wanted to be on. I don't know what organization though.
And I assume that question is for me.
Sure, Kai.
Well, to be clear, the QR code that was mentioned there was an example. So there is no mandate for providing a QR code, neither a dynamic one nor a static one. What it says is there must be an easy way for an ad hoc payment which is actually secure and basically through a mobile device. How the user is being linked to that sort of payment platform where he then just can enter all the necessary details for actually activating the session and pay for it, the legislation does not provide information on that. So if that is actually an easy way and it is actually accessible to everybody, but whatever ideas you want to implement should be fine, as long as it is really, I mean, what do we want to achieve? We want to achieve that anybody arriving at a recharging point can easily pay with the instruments that basically every citizen has, which is a mobile phone and a credit or debit card. If that is insured, great. If that is not insured, it's illegal.
Okay. Does that mean a payment card on a phone?
What do you mean? An embedded payment card in the Google Wallet or the Apple Wallet, in our opinion, and this is what we wrote in the Q&R, is completely fine because it is considered to be a payment card.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kai. I know these are a little bit, let's say, repetitive questions from what is written, but I just want to make sure the audience is also aware of them, but I can only encourage them to actually read the document if they haven't done so. Peter, back to you. Do you believe that there is enough certainty for industry and the consumers with the recently published AFIR Q&A?
I mean, look, I think it's great that the Commission has found this compromise, right? Because in the EU, it is indeed the Court of Justice that has to decide, and usually it's on a case-by-case basis. So I understand also why a lot of the items in the Q&A have been left at this, at this stage to be answered on a case-by-case basis. We actually took part together with quite a lot of CharIN members in internal discussions also to understand a bit better and get some additional clarity on some of the still open questions that we had. And I think more or less it's clear right now what, at least from our side, in terms of the payment services, what are we supposed to do. There's some guidance on how also the pricing should be formed, and generally that the pricing element is very sensitive for the single market. What I would also point out here is that there's not just the legal text as AFIR right now is constructed. We're also expecting to see very soon the common technical requirements, which are to be set from Article 21. That will really help us understand how to foster this full technical interoperability through the use of protocols, through the use of reporting as well. And also not to mention the whole work that needs to be done on national level with regards to the access points and the policy frameworks. So it's by far not a complete picture yet, but certainly we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully it will be also easy for businesses to adapt to the new requirements.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe back to you, Kai, also a little bit of a reflection on what Peter has said. And you had mentioned before that there had been, let's say, a reevaluation of some of the answers in the original drafts. In the final results, do you believe the European Commission, obviously after the legislative procedures and the relevant interpretation, achieved the ambitions it sought for, especially from a consumer-centric approach?
Well, I hope so. I think when you look into the answers and also into the Commission proposals, we actually had a quite clear stand on what needs to be provided, and that would probably go a little bit beyond what we actually have now in the legal text. But I think that's fair enough. I think this is the legislative process that we have. It provides now quite a lot of flexibility to charge point operators to provide actually consumer-friendly solutions, while basically also being very, very easy to handle for the operator. So that has the potential of being an excellent compromise if that is implemented correctly. You know, we already had in AFIT since 2014 the legal requirement that ad hoc payment must be possible, and it did not really work. I think this is why we actually had legislation in Germany already trying to raise more prescriptive, because operators were not so keen on implementing that. So we will also now have a watchful eye on what is actually happening in the market, how charge point operators interpret and actually put the article into practice. And there's going to be a review in 2026, and I really hope we don't have to touch it again, because basically operators find solutions that actually enables every user to pay easily at every recharging point. If that is ensured, we don't have to touch it again, and everything is fine.
Thanks, Kai. Same question to you, Jan, but maybe from the German government perspective, of course. I mean, the involvement of Germany and obviously NOW within the STF, and of course, when it comes to the overall negotiations of the legislation, do you think the consumer-centric approach that is sought for has been achieved, and does it actually correspond, in your view, to what the German initiative was before?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way the text is written now is definitely a huge step forward towards, better solutions for the consumer, about easier charging. And I mean, the German position in the beginning, we had a change in government, so the German position actually changed during the negotiations, but I think we're really fine with the outcome. If you can pay with a widely accepted means of payment, which debit or credit cards certainly are, I guess the German government is absolutely fine with it. And well, one of the absolute advantages of this is that this will be valid for the entirety of the single market in Europe, or the EU at least. And that's basically a huge win.
Great. I agree as well in many aspects, having worked together with many of you ahead of its final outcome. Maybe moving on to pin pads. Peter, from what I understand, you're an expert in pin pads, inside and out.
But please shoot.
How do you perceive the question of pin pads in relation to the ongoing discussions pertaining to AFIR with regards to the taking effect thereof and the relevant payment legislations or reviews, future PSD3 payment services regulation?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that AFIR isn't certainly in silos. There's the PSD2 revision. I think having this topic generally open to interpretation, since indeed above 50 kilowatts, operators can choose either terminals or NFC only. I think it can, in the end of the day, cause some concerns among customers if a pin pad isn't available. And I'm really curious to see how charging point operators who approach this. My personal thought here is that a lot of those companies who try to stay on the safe side and introduce a pin pad nonetheless. But then comes the discussion with PSD and if secure authorization would be required. There's a lot of details here on what type of transactions would that authorization be required. We can perhaps go into the details on that too. But generally, I think it will be important for customers to have as many options as possible. And I think that the regulation opens up for that.
All right, thank you, Peter. I mean, as you know, through CharIN, we've been working very hard, especially on the question of pin pad for under 50 kilowatts. And that's industry is quite well placed to understand what consumer requirements are according to providing the relevant availability. So I mean, maybe,
yeah. On the other hand, I mean, we see some trends with payment kiosks for places where you have several charging points, which can be also a way to address this topic, certainly.
No, absolutely. And we'll revisit that in a second, but maybe to you, Kai, within that context, and I know it's set out within the Q&A itself, but maybe you can help our audience understand AFIR's relation to the payment legislation reviews, which are ongoing at the moment.
Yeah, I hope I can actually avoid that question, because we got them in the Q&A, and it's exactly the point where I cannot tell you a clear Commission position, because this is really up for the courts to decide. To give you a little bit of my thinking, nevertheless, AFIR does not request a PIN pad. It requests an NFC reader as an option here. So you either have to have a payment terminal or an NFC reader. It does not talk about PIN pad, and that is logical, because if it needs a PIN pad, it's basically not governed through a sector legislation. As far as I understand, PSD also doesn't require a PIN pad. It basically just says, well, basically, once you reach certain limits with your card, you need to identify yourself with a code, which basically requires the operator, if he actually wants the person to actually buy something at that machine, to actually offer a PIN code, because otherwise he cannot sell. So as I said, AFIR itself does not require this, but AFIR says, well, you must be able to pay with a payment card. So if you actually arrive at a charge point without a PIN pad, and as long as PSD does not exempt charge points from actually this identification, then there's a risk that that person cannot charge. He will always be able to charge if he basically has an embedded credit card, because then basically the authentication is done through its phone. How would a court of justice now decide if somebody who actually has not an embedded card, but is more like a dinosaur, like me, who actually just has plastic cards and cannot charge, and actually takes that charge point operator to court, saying, well, you have not provided me a payment option where I can actually pay? I have no idea how they will decide. I honestly have absolutely no idea, and I think arguments can be made, or legal arguments can be made for both sides. On the safe, you want to be on the safe side. I think a PIN pad is certainly a useful thing to install. But of course, we don't know how PSD will develop, if there might be an exemption at some point, and then you would not need it in any case. So it's really a question that we cannot give a clear black and white yes or no answer to, because it has a number of aspects here that will be relevant if one wants to make a legal judgment here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kai. Within the context of, I mean, electric mobility, the moving away from one paradigm to the other, I mean, it's a very, very big step. And of course, a lot of things are up in the air, as you mentioned as well, the decisions of the European Court of Justice. Maybe the question to you, Peter, before I go into a little bit more detail, does it worry you that a lot of things are up to the European Court of Justice?
Well, I think that in the end of the day, this only makes the enforcement of the regulation a bit weaker. Because it would take simply a lot of time. And I would be very interested to hear how this will be made up for, because in the end of the day, it might be the case that also member states are not taking the appropriate measures to set the type of fines for non-compliance. And I'll be very interested to see how this will develop, because I think it will make generally this openness could make the enforcement of the regulation a bit less certain.
Thanks, Peter. European Court of Justice decisions, they are essentially triggered through several different methods. The ones I encountered the most is obviously infringement cases, which take a little bit longer, but also preliminary rulings. Infringement cases, very simply put, take a little bit longer. I know there's a longer procedure, there's an investigation, etc., usually also through complaints of any type of party. But also looking at preliminary rulings where a National Court of Justice refers a question of interpretation. Taking both of those and maybe the others that are on the list, where do you see the likelihoods that are going to be the determinant pathways to European Court of Justice decisions, Kai?
Oh, that sounds like a complicated legal question. First of all, because you said that earlier, that we leave things to the European Court of Justice, I don't think that is actually the case. I mean, we have a very clear legal text. But of course, it actually, and this is what the sector asked for, they also asked for flexibility. What you cannot have is 100% clear legal text covering every single aspect and flexibility. That doesn't work. We want to be future open. It has to be a little bit more vague. I mean, otherwise we would have needed to say, well, every single recharging point, no matter what, payment terminal, and that's it. That is 100% legal certainty, but I don't think that is something that the sector wants, and it's certainly nothing that from a commission point we want, because it just makes things unnecessarily expensive. So that means we provide flexibility, and if the sector actually introduces solutions here that nobody contests in the first place, because everybody is happy with it, then there will also be no Court of Justice involvement, because nobody asked the Court of Justice anything, because everybody is happy in the first place. So I think that is the general idea here. If we basically in our Q&A so often refer back to the individual case-by-case assessment that can ultimately only be decided, first of all, by national courts, but ultimately by the Court of Justice, it's because, well, it has some flexibility, and everything really needs to then to be decided on a case-by-case basis, because it's not black and white. How these things will go, infringements is probably not the case here, because we are talking about Article 5 here. Infringement goes against member states, so we will probably rather have infringements when member states don't comply with the provisions in the regulation. So here we're talking about Article 3, Article 4, when it comes to the targets, and member states fail to ensure that the targets are being met. The member state has absolutely nothing to do with Article 5, as far as I can read it. So here it is the direct addressee of the regulation is the charge point operator or the mobility service provider, who actually have to comply. It is national law, so if a user or user association feels that CPO in that member state is not doing what they're actually supposed to do, this association will go to this national court and will actually go against that operator. And then that national court might actually ask the European Court of Justice, what the heck did the people in Brussels actually mean with what they actually wrote there? That can happen, doesn't necessarily have to happen, because they might actually think it's clear enough. So that will be then the normal process here. And of course, the Commission could also basically go against certain operators in case we believe there's a clear break of the spirit of the regulation and the legal text.
Thank you, Kai. Very, very informative. Maybe I can ask Jan as well, what are your expectations with regard to the preliminary rulings system? Do you think they are going to be flooding the gates of the courts?
No, I mean, it's a little impossible to say at this stage, but I think, well, the market has already reacted to what has transpired from the initial stages of the Q&A, and we have got a lot of good solutions out there. And then, like Kai said, I mean, I don't see the member states go beyond anything that the regulation says. I guess there's little appetite for that, and also really little, well, room to maneuver, because we are not the addressees of this article.
Thanks. Yeah. Maybe one more large combined question for you. Do you expect discrepancies amongst countries in the implementation of the regulation? I mean, I know it has to be taken on board as a whole, but within the scope of, and here's the second part, providing additional legislative measures to complement AFIR or other relevant charging payment service legislation. I mean, we know that in a regulation, unless specifically said or stated, it's only an exception where national legislation should complement. But what are your expectations for Germany and maybe for your neighboring, also for longer distant countries?
Yeah, I mean, as it is directly applicable under regulation now, I don't expect much divergence. And basically, what could happen is that, well, national regulatory frameworks have not been adapted yet, something like that, because, well, the final Q&A basically just came out a few hours before the application of AFIR, and some member states might have waited for that, but all else, I mean, I see a little appetite to go beyond it, to be then judged perhaps on a case-by-case basis in front of the court, no matter whether it's Article 5 or anything else. Don't really think that that's going to be the case. I mean, the co-legislators really had that as a policy goal, to have a regulation in place that is valid for Europe in its entirety, and to get rid of everything that we had with different transpositions of AFID and the mess that was basically in place in the market in terms of, well, ad hoc payment.
Thank you, Jan. Definitely, again, a compliment about AFIR and the step up from AFID. And so from industry side, I can say there are a lot of points that are very satisfactory. But the same question to you then, Peter. With your bird's eye view, so to say, in so many jurisdictions that you're involved in the EU, do you see discrepancies coming? With your finger on the pulse, have you heard anything?
You mean discrepancies within Europe?
Yeah.
Well, I agree that AFIR will bring this alignment, and certainly companies, especially who operate across several markets, will have a more universal approach towards those markets. Now, that's at least for what's said in AFIR. Let's not forget there's other legislation as well that they need to abide by. A lot of it has to do with their operations as a financial entity in a sort of the word. So the way that they have to anticipate what other regulatory changes are impacting their operation, anything that has to do with VAT, anything that could be covered by roaming as well, if a country decides to take some measures on that, because it's not really, apart from pricing, it's not really covered in AFIR. And you mentioned in the beginning the topic of e-invoicing. That's also another topic that is diverging across markets. So there is a lot of opportunities still for divergence, but I think generally we're moving in the right direction. The industry is going to appreciate this certainty with AFIR. Just to maybe compare it with some of the other legislation that came across different markets among the same time, more or less. We have in the US the Navy minimum standards, which are again covering public charging points. In the UK, also the public charge point regulations, which are already enforced as well. And both those, governments, they in a way cover what the EU is doing with AFIR, In some aspects, they go beyond that. In others, they don't really touch upon some of the topics. But for example, when it comes to the implementation guidelines, the UK government provided a document similar to the Q&A, in which it gave also some examples of how those policies can be implemented. And I think it will be interesting to see what the review of AFIR will say as well in a couple of years, whether it will go for other aspects like uptime requirements or other methods of payments. For example, in the US, it's specific, but they do have toll-free number payments. They have SMS payments. They have customer service hotlines as well at each stations now as a requirement. So it will be interesting to see if the EU moves even beyond what's currently said in AFIR.
Well, I actually wanted to keep this question for a little bit later, but a question for all three of you. Do you, starting with you, Peter, do you see the ongoing legislation, regulation levels at the EU level as an inspiration for other markets? Do you see it being duplicated? Do you see other geographies saying, "Oh, let's learn from the European side of things"? I mean, I have my own answer, but we're not here to listen to me today.
I'll be curious to hear that too at the end. But I think generally, EV charging, and speaking looking at all the businesses that operate in Europe, we do have global leadership. It's not that many industries where we do have such a leadership, and especially in the space of digital technologies. In EV charging, there's a bunch of companies across the whole ecosystem which are global leaders. That being said, also the market has supported them to emerge in all different aspects of EV charging. And I think certainly when it comes to the policy that has been set, there's more or less an alignment with what's happening in the UK and in the US. But as I mentioned, some of those governments, they go beyond what AFIR is saying. Since we're working in many markets, we're also looking at what's happening in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East. But I wouldn't go on to say that those governments are as ambitious as EU in terms of mandating requirements. So I think it's a good exercise to compare how US, UK, and the EU have been advancing in terms of standardization of legislation in the sector.
Kai, you're next. Regulatory lead, Europe. How do you perceive the external eye?
Well, I'm mostly focused on making it work here, and I think that is enough of a challenge. And then see how and if other countries actually take up certain ideas, just the better. For us as well, certainly makes sense to look around what is going on, what might actually work better in other markets, to see if there are better ways of doing it than we do it. Certainly that remains what we are also doing here. But I can only just repeat, I think my main focus here and our main focus is to make it work for the consumer and the industry here in Europe as best as possible.
Kai, may I ask you a question? Actually, I know that Europe keeps the dialogue with the US on transport topics, and there's, I believe, several meetings per year in forgot the abbreviation of the forum, but it was a
TTC.
forum. Yeah, exactly. So I'm wondering if there's any discussion there to align on some of the trends in EV charging specifically.
Well, I think the biggest focus is there on standards. So here we're talking about the megawatt charger now, so actually have a common standard there as well. So there's cooperation ongoing. On the other hand, we know that the American markets, when it comes to car charging, goes rather into the Tesla standard. simply because the US never mandated a standard. And since most of the charging points there are Tesla, it's basically the market who decided for the US which standard is being applied there, and that is now moving towards Tesla. So these are things that we cannot influence from our side, and I don't think there's any appetite in changing our standards now towards what is actually developing in the US. So I think we are in exchange there, cooperate where it makes sense, like on the MCS, and exchange also experiences.
Thanks, Kai. Maybe just to mention, not most of the charging stations, but most of the functioning charging stations in the US. Jan, question to you as well, moving back to the point before we follow the wise words of Kai and focus on making it work in Europe. But also now with a German dynamic, do you have a lot of interestees trying to see what is being done when it comes to sticking now to the payment systems? To see what is happening in the EU and in Germany?
Yeah. So I mean, for the question you raised before, whether other jurisdictions are really adopting that the AFIR standard, if you will, or the AFIR provisions, I guess it's a little early to tell. So 1.5 weeks after the application of the regulation. But what I think, what you can say already, that the more advanced jurisdictions really have realized also that limiting some payment options actually benefits the consumer. Because I mean, I can tell you from the German experience, we also had really several ways to comply with the ad hoc criterion, and in the end, the consumer never really knew what to expect. And it's really very beneficial if you know that, okay, with my credit card, be it on my phone or in my pocket, or my debit card, for that matter, I can pay. Perhaps I'm focusing a little too much on ad hoc charging, but in terms of the question you asked, I would say, yeah, most jurisdictions, I guess, have realized that this is a benefit to the consumer.
Thank you, Jan. I've got another question actually from Dennis Tejas. It's a more, yeah, well, it's a known answer, but I wanted to give you a chance to answer it. What is the set timeline to add payment terminals to already deployed public chargers? Kai, do you want to go for that one?
I must say, I don't know my legislation by heart. There is a retrofit requirement, and I think it's 2027, but only for recharging points above 50 kilowatt and on those located along the 10T. So there is a retrofit requirement. It is in Article 5.1. And that's specific. That's actually very, very black and white. No interpretation there. I'm not sure if I've fully quoted it now correctly, but there is a retrofit requirement, but only above 50 kilowatt and only on certain locations.
So you do know your legislation, Kai. Thank you. Okay, coming back to Europe as mentioned. Peter, we talked about pin pads, and you already touched upon a couple of other customer experience relevant elements like screens, kiosks, receipts to be in a separate discussion. Do you think legislation provides the relevant certainty? Are there gaps that should be addressed at the legislative level? What's the geographical legislative framework at the EU level, in your view?
Well, I think for the most part, there is a good level of conditions already put on the market. In terms of perhaps what new technology has to be introduced, we see that there's increased use of payment kiosks, as I mentioned, and also generally larger screens for users. I think there's a lot that should be done also in the area of accessibility. And this is something that actually charge point operators can use as their leverage to attract new customers. And in the end of the day, let's not forget that EV charging is also part of a larger transition, which is the energy transition, and the integration of renewable energy has to be supported by EV charging. So I see, at least on the market, more and more operators being cautious and being rather proactive to that. In some governments also have pushed forward, let's call them carbon credits or systems, which remunerate or reward rather operators for introducing renewable energy. So I think there's additional legislation also supporting that, like the Renewable Energy Directive, which will help, for example, the introduction of renewables. Leave it at this, but for sure, it's not a silos approach here with AFIR.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Jan or Kai, would you like to add something to that? No. No. Okay. One more question for you, Peter, before I move on with an outlook towards the future. There are technical items around troubleshooting, which are also very interesting for the customer experience, and you touched upon that before. Troubleshooting and reliability generally isn't really something that AFIR addresses in the area of payments, but there's a lot at stake there. You wrote those words. What do you mean with that?
Let me just unmute myself. So when it comes to troubleshooting, it's really about what happens when a driver arrives at the station and the station is not fully operational. So the requirement for the station to be connected really has to consider what happens and how should the station behave in an event where there's, let's say, a power loss during a stage of the recharging process, or if there is something that has to be further addressed when the payment is being processed. Understanding how the communication is being done between different actors is important, and to that end, also giving the drivers more visibility as what is happening with their charging session is important. So that's what I wanted to highlight really here. And I already mentioned certain requirements in the US, for example, for federally funded chargers already require the charger to communicate even when it has been disconnected when it comes to the payment aspect.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Troubleshooting, Jan, would you like to add anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier for a member state to address this topic if the charging station has been funded, because then you also can ask for the uptime, the data on uptime sensor, because you might not even know whether stations are or have been defect or out of service for a long time. So it's really easier for us to make people really follow certain uptime requirements if the station was funded or funding was part of a concession. It's really nothing where we have legislation in place where we could say, okay, every station has to be up for 90% of the year or something like that. And it's really also one of the challenges is to know which stations are actually up or which ones are out of service.
Thanks, and interesting point about reporting obligations of uptime. Kai, I know we have at European level quite a bit of discussion about uptime and reporting obligations previously. What's your view on that? Should it be only, for example, publicly funded charging stations, or is that in the interest to make sure that the infrastructure is at that level that it's supposed to be?
Well, you made the remark earlier about those stations in the US which are actually always online, which is Tesla. And those are the ones who probably didn't receive any funding because, and they're simply up and running because Tesla is trying to make business. We had discussions here when we proposed RFIR about do we need uptime requirements? And I think the idea here was to say, no, we don't, because we are regulating here not a funding program, where I think this makes absolute sense, or concessions, where you may, as a government, actually want to actually ensure that this is not being done by people who basically just look for the subsidies and run away with the subsidies and don't care about the infrastructure. But the infrastructure we are regulating through RFIR is increasingly not publicly funded. So there's a business case behind it. So I don't think it's up to the legislator to actually regulate uptimes of commercially funded infrastructure. We are not regulating uptimes of petrol stations, as far as I know, or of coffee vending machines or whatever. It's a commercial business, and well, the companies who are investing in it will actually ensure that they are up and running unless those recharging points are absolutely not used, in which case they are being dismantled at some point. And I think this is what RFIR is doing. We are no longer a legislation for ensuring just some infrastructure. We're actually ensuring the uptake to the market. So we still now have targets here for member states to be met, but that is basically about setting the right framework. Otherwise, we believe we have a functioning market here, largely in Western Europe already, and I hope that Eastern European markets and Southern European markets are actually catching up quickly now as well. We have more than 600,000 recharging points as well, and I expect them to be beyond 1 million in a couple of years. Nobody can actually monitor the uptime of them as well. It's a market. And I don't think we should actually start intervening in these sort of details.
Thanks, Kai. I hope it had nothing to do with your answer that we lost Peter. No, there he is. Okay, as promised, moving towards the future.
I had to plug in and recharge a little bit.
Okay, good. Moving towards the future. Jan, let me pick on you. Where do you think the future of payment systems will lead? Or maybe a bit more concretely, what tech do you see prevailing that is on the market now?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with ad hoc charging. And then for more than equal to or more than 50 kilowatts, my guess would be that we see a lot of NFC systems with or without a PIN pad, but I would imagine that a lot of operators try it without a PIN pad first, where you can authenticate with your cell phone or your smartphone. And then for lower than 50 kilowatts, I mean, already in the market, we see a lot of the manufacturers actually offering dynamic QR codes. And if you're on the safe side, if you use dynamic QR codes, but I think it's hard to tell exactly what will happen. So, I mean, I could also imagine, I don't know, changes in protocols and so on. So you can use perhaps static QR codes. But I don't know, the way it's put right now, with you having to ensure secure payments, it's not that easy to resolve, I would say, right? So I don't think it's likely that there will be a lot of cameras installed with normal charging infrastructure, or that there will be regular checks done by the CPOs. That seems very costly to me, and also raises other, well, different issues, especially if you use cameras. And then for all the contract-based charging, which is not directly addressed as part of RFIR, my guess would be that, well, for long, well, in the medium term, we will still see a lot of RFID cards being used. And then hopefully we'll have a gradual shift towards automatic authentication. And yeah, that's basically it for the medium term. For the long term, if you ask my wishes, I can reply to that later.
Thanks, Jan. I just got I have to jump. I will come back to that because you touched on a lot of important points and a lot of questions that we still have for the last, I may say 18 minutes. But I just got a message from one of the speakers. Actually, it's your colleague, Peter. The US legislature ensures reliability of chargers by first imposing uptime standards and then funding all compliant to that rule. Australia has imposed such a rule also as of January 2024. But I guess we still don't want that in Europe.
Unless, I mean, not sure to which extent you're aware of the work we have to do to prepare a legislative proposal with evaluation and impact assessments, which is a hell of work because we always have to justify any sort of policy intervention. So we really have to identify a huge problem before we would actually even consider doing anything like that. And unless we all of a sudden see a massive drop in the availability of recharging points with people being stranded and not being able to drive, I don't think we have any legal basis. We don't have a basis for actually intervening in that area. And I think if we should really come to that situation where recharging points are not being operated any longer and not maintained, and the operators are basically getting out of the business, we actually have a much larger problem with electromobility, and that will also then not be solved through requiring uptime requirements.
Thank you, Kai. Does anybody else want to reflect on that point?
I mean, I can tell you a little from the member state perspective, and from what I remember from the negotiations during the ordinary legislative procedure, even though I have not been around for the entire time, I can't recall member states really raising that point or wishing to have uptime requirements. I mean, just really general consensus that the market has to solve that, and CPOs should have, an interest, commercial interest in keeping their infrastructure going.
Right, thank you, Jan. I have another question. And it's stopping me a little bit from looking at the future, but I just love the question so much. I wish I could answer it myself, but again, not about me today. Does the group believe ISO 15118, including the new EMV specs, will be the future of payment? I'm not quite sure what EMV specs are, but ISO 15118 already caught my attention.
Well, if that's for ad hoc, certainly not looking like it in Europe. But I believe personally that plug-in charge will be increasingly used. Now, there's still a lot of discussions there on aspects like data security and privacy. But in the end of the day, OEMs are introducing it. The hardware vendors are also moving in that direction. But I still believe it will be one of the options. Certainly, we're not looking into moving into a market where there's only one option for payment.
Kai?
Well, automatic authentication will play a role. We will see which one, up to the market to decide, up to the users to decide if they actually like that option, and up to the operators to make or the MSPs to make actually attractive offers so that it's being used. It's fully allowed, it's fully enabled under the framework. Happy to see any sort of good developments coming up there. We don't regulate it. And that was also a cautious decision. We believe this is up to the market to develop it, and we are just basically providing the enabling functionalities here. This is why we are discussing under the Delegated Act to further mandate also 15118 as communication protocols. There we do have the mandate under AFIR, so we are allowed to do that. For us, it is all about enabling these sort of new payment options, business concepts to come into the market. And the reason why we actually have to have ad hoc is to actually ensure that everybody can have always the opportunity to charge everywhere. That we will probably not achieve through 15.11.8, at least not today. So this is why we actually do have the mandate here on ad hoc charging, but leave all the other stuff, automatic authentication, roaming, up to the market, leave it to the market players to develop the best solution, and then see which role also then ad hoc payment will play in the market in the future.
All right, thank you, Karin. Okay, now really looking towards the future. Peter, I asked you this. Sorry, go on.
Just jumping quickly on as a follow-up to what Kai was just saying, and also Jan's words from earlier, in terms of new technology also being introduced. In my conversations with folks in the payment industry, it was brought up to me that also biometric authentication of card payment is also around the corner. So credit and debit cards might be changing very time soon, at least the way we know them now, and how we will be using user authentication and payment authorization for paying with those cards. So that would be also an interesting trend to keep an eye on.
Well, within that note, Peter, as you mentioned it, my question was also going to be what current tech will prevail and what new tech will be on the market.
Yeah, so other than that, I think also in the context of contract-based payment, we will see more and more the use of various machine learning algorithms to predict user behavior, to optimize pricing strategies based on that. I mean, there's already a lot of pilots running with this in mind to make sure that not just we have analysis of historical data, but also current real-time data, so that the optimal charging patterns in terms of times, locations, and also payment plans can be tailored to the drivers. We see also how loyalty programs bring a lot of value into that. So I think this will be something big coming to the market very soon.
Thank you, Peter. Data, all right. What a big theme, what a big conversation. And I know it's being dealt with as well within the STF of the European Commission. Maybe that's more for a subject for another time, but I want to touch upon a point that was made regarding security concerns. I mean, we talk about security when the payment or the payment platform initiation is on. I mean, there we look at QR code, static, dynamic, etc., etc. First one to want to say something. What are the other concerns relevant to, or general concerns relevant to, payment services security? Kai, I'm going to pick on you. Sorry.
Yeah, I thought our silence was a sign that we may not be the persons to talk to, at least not me. I think security of payment services is not for AFIR, and it's not a sector-specific issue. It needs to be resolved through the appropriate legislation, and that's PSD. That's not my field of expertise, and there we basically just trust the colleagues to come up with a solution that actually ensures secure payments. And whatever is done there would be expected to also be applied in the charging market.
Thank you, Karin. Jan?
Yeah, I mean, the main concerns, I guess, right now are fraud, right? So especially if you look at static QR codes or stickers with QR codes, they might lead you to a phishing website. They're easily manipulated, and then, I don't know, either personal data or money is extracted from you. And then in general, for the infrastructure, I mean, the general charging infrastructure, the concerns are, of course, also, well, all sorts of cybercrime, like, I don't know, denial of service attacks. Just basically the problem that you could disable the entire infrastructure by DDoS attacks and so on. But this is out of scope of AFIR. I would also say this is more NIS2 and the like.
Fair enough. But for the static QR code, I've heard that there are quite a few solutions to overcome the fake sticker. I mean, doesn't matter if it's a static QR code behind a nice glass screen and so on and so forth. But yeah, maybe the same question for you, Peter, where you've mentioned a couple of issues regarding payment services security. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. In the end of the day, I agree with Kai. It goes beyond the EV charging industry for sure. I mean, it's not just about personal data, it's about the grids as well. Think of the impacts of actually hacking into a station and crashing the grid. I mean, that could be done at a scale if there's a security breach at large. At least from our perspective, from a software perspective, we at Ampeco, we do not process really any payment or cardholder data. That's something that essentially our services process tokenized card data through the integrations we do payment processors. And it's those payment processors who are subject to the PCI compliance. But I think the biggest challenge here is really with regards to the grid.
Thank you, Peter. Looking at the current state of affairs at the regulatory level and kind of going a little bit full circle, before I go to the last point of the one takeaway, what next steps should be taken to cater further to the consumer needs? What additional European regulation would be necessary? And maybe I'll start with you, Peter. How will industry further fulfill this ambition?
I think what matters right now is to implement properly what's being decided with AFIR. I think that's a good step to start with. And I mentioned earlier the national access points and the type of information that's being communicated. It will be important to have a harmonized approach there, and also something that's really helping the consumers. And same goes with the national policy frameworks and the way that member states dictate what's happening in terms of progress. I think that's a good next step. And also, as Kai mentioned, the delegated act will provide some more details on the technical interoperability aspects.
Thank you. Same question to you, Kai, maybe not from the industry perspective, but what would you like the industry maybe to do more within that, let's say, context, but also from the regulatory side?
But I hope that basically the objectives of AFIR are well understood, and the regulation just implemented also with the spirit of AFIR in mind. And then I hope we don't have to regulate that any further. So that would be my hope for 2026, that we basically say, okay, we don't have any complaints. I haven't received any consumer complaint for a year in Europe about recharging not being possible because of a lack of payment options. And no complaints any longer about no sufficient information about the recharging prices, no price shocks. I mean, we addressed all these things, and I genuinely believe that actually what we have there should be sufficient for the next decades to come, when it comes at least to those aspects. And well, we might see that, and this is what Peter, I think, mentioned, we don't know exactly where payment's going to be in 10 years' time. I mean, we could easily see a world where basically plastic cards might simply disappear. That is an option. So certainly then we would need to adjust Article 5.1 to whatever we have as new technical developments. But I actually hope we got otherwise. We got Article 5.1 right, and we don't need any additional legislation to ensure that really all consumer aspects are being taken care of, because I believe normally the regulation should do it.
Okay, maybe a bit blunt with my question then regarding the review in 2026. What's the motivation behind it?
The main motivation is not Article 5. The main motivation is Article 4 and 6. It's about heavy-duty vehicles. It's about the recharging infrastructure. I think there are the biggest doubts. Did we get the targets right for both electric and hydrogen? Are they too high? Are they too low? Where are we going with the markets? We are having analysis about that under the STF, but also through a study. We have to publish a commission report, so a communication on where the market is actually going. How many vehicles do we expect? Not like another Prime's technical theoretical analysis, but basically by talking to the operators and the manufacturers. How will the CO2 emission performance targets for HDV be met? What does it mean? Which kind of vehicles will be in the market? Which kind of technical profiles do we have? Which kind of charging needs will they have? And then look, are these recharging provisions that we have in Article 4 and 6 actually accurate and correct? I think there were the biggest question marks also during the negotiations. So that's the reason why we have such an early review date is because of Article 4 and Article 6. Also Article 9 for shipping, but there we probably even need more time to see what kind of alternative fuels we will actually have in shipping. That 2026 probably comes too early. No, I mean, let's be clear. The review is for the heavy duty sector, most likely, unless we actually realize we got something completely wrong in other articles as well.
Thank you, Kai. We're coming close to the end, so now the time to shine with your one takeaway for the audience. Jan, you want to go first?
I'm sure. I can only second what Kai and Peter already said. So, I mean, we have the legislation in place. For the moment, we don't need additional legislation. From a public sector view, it's always astonishing how quickly the market addresses challenges and provides solutions. So I would give it some time. Pretty hopeful and confident that we're going to have good solutions for the customer. My wish would be, though, to have in the medium to long term also ad hoc charging enabled for automatic authentication systems. So I don't know, perhaps you guys at CharIN can have a look at that in the revision of the standard or the next versions of the standard, whether that would be possible. So the rationale behind that is to really keep a level playing field between contract-based and ad hoc charging. That's one of the rationales that we are following, just also really to increase competition in the market and to have, well, the benefit for the consumer in the end also with lower prices if possible.
Thank you, Jan. Quite a wish list, but I will make sure to reiterate the message. Peter?
It's one wish, Glenn, one.
Well, you said prices as well, on top of authentication for ad hoc.
It's magically going to happen then afterwards.
Okay.
Sure.
Go on, Peter.
Well, thanks, first of all, for the nice discussion that you facilitated, Glenn. You know, kind of wanted to touch about prices as well, but I won't go into that direction. Certainly an important topic. But I think the key takeaway for me here is that it's important to keep the flexibility, and charging operators should continue to prioritize offering a variety of payment options to accommodate all the users and all their needs. And as a broader consequence, should also try to make sure that security is a key element in their offering. So I'll leave it at this.
Thank you, Peter. Kai?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much used to stakeholders telling us what to do, but I now saw Jan actually asking stakeholders what they actually should do in their future work, and that's a nice sort of turn around things. but I haven't thought about it before, so I don't really have anything concrete to ask from CharIN today. But I like the ad hoc payment option. So an embedded credit card as well in the car, then you can choose, okay, I take the contract, or well, that might be a thing to think about. No, takeaway, I think Article 5 for me, as I said, is I think the right way forward, and I hope it provides the necessary flexibility for operators and provides good solutions for consumers. Next step, not Article 5, but data. I think data is the big issue that we actually have in the next coming month and years, because that is also important for consumers, that they have good information in their applications they are using on the recharging, good routing solutions. Full information about the availability of charging anywhere. So that is the thing that I think is what we are focusing on now, the upcoming delegated acts on data, but then also by providing the necessary infrastructure for sharing the data. I think this is a huge topic which is coming up. Well, we define the data now that charge point operators need to make available. But how we bring that data actually to those operators that can actually make use of the data and present it to the customers, I think there we still have some work to do. So that's my takeaway also for the way forward. One of the big issues for consumers is to get that right.
Perfect, Kai, thank you very much. I think on that note, it's also time to kind of highlight the upcoming CharIN Tuesdays. I mean, data is certainly a big thing on the agenda. We're working within the STF on this. We're working within CharIN. We're seeing a little bit in what direction it's going before we start initiating another CharIN Tuesday on that. But here, as promised, already 3 key, well, CharIN Tuesday themes that we're going to be organizing in the upcoming months: grid codes integrating e-mobility and renewable energy, taxonomy and CSR, impact for the e-mobility sector. The context, I can go on for forever on both the first 2, and obviously the third one as well, EU elections, what impact on the e-mobility sector, or for the e-mobility sector, in case the preposition of one or the others is the correct one. Forgive my English. So those are definitely on the agenda. You'll find more information shortly on the CharIN website. And then we also have in Poland, the upcoming conference Europe 2024 in Zielona Góra, hosted by Ekoenergetyka Polska. I will be there moderating as well, in case you have become a big fan. I know some of you will definitely be there. Again, here, more information to be found on the website. So a big thank you to the 3 of you for joining today, for taking the time, for being open with your answers and answering all types of questions. And yeah, definitely, if any of the attendees have any questions for the panelists, I'm sure if you have their contact details, I'll be happy to answer them. If not, I'll be happy to forward them. So a big thank you again to the 3 of you, and looking forward to staying in touch as we always do.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.